Hello everyone. Today we'll be discussing about the reflexes that are involved in the maintenance of posture. So first of all, we'll discuss about stretch reflex and inverse stretch reflex. Okay. So what do you understand by stretch reflex? A very simple definition of stretch reflex is when an innervated muscle is stretched, it responds by contraction. Okay. So simply when an innervated muscle it undergoes stretching, it responds by contraction. This is a very simple definition of stretch reflex. Now we'll understand that how does this happen. So basically the stretch reflex, what is it? This is a monosynaptic reflex. Monosynaptic reflex. So what is the meaning of monosynaptic? So just split it up. Mono means single, synaptic means synapse. So before jumping on towards the stretch reflex, we shall have a clear understanding about what is synapse. So synapse, basically it consists of three things. First is the presynaptic terminal. This is the presynaptic terminal and it contains some vesicles. After the presynaptic terminal, there is presence of a small cleft that is called as synaptic cleft. And here is the presence of postsynaptic membrane. Okay. So the vesicles that are present over this presynaptic area, they consist of some neurotransmitters which are released into this synaptic cleft. Okay. And the thickness or the space that is occupied by this cleft, it is around 20 to 40 nanometer. Now the vesicles, they contain neurotransmitters and these neurotransmitters, they get attached over the receptors that are present over the postsynaptic membrane. Okay, so that explains the one-way conduction of the impulses, because vesicles are over the presynaptic membrane, they are released into this cleft, and receptors that are present over the postsynaptic membrane, they help in the transmission of postsynaptic potential. It can be excitatory postsynaptic potential or inhibitory postsynaptic potential. Okay. So this is, as we had already talked about, this is a monosynaptic reflex. There is only presence of one synapse. For example, if these are the afferent fibers, they will go to the integration center, okay, and from this point the postsynaptic fibers, they will reach to the target organs. That's how it is called as a monosynaptic reflex. Now there are two terms. First term is reaction time. So, and second term, it is central delay. So reaction time, it is the time between the application of stimulus and the effect that is observed at the level of target organ. And central delay, it is around 0.6 to 0.9 millisecond, and it is the interval during which there is traversion of the impulse through the spinal cord or through the integration center. Okay. Now, in case of stretch reflex, we had already told the definition. When an innervated muscle, it is stretched, it responds by contracting. Now, our muscle, it consists of basically two types of fibers. Okay. This flow chart or this diagram, it is very, very important. Muscle, it consists of two types of fibers. First are extrafugal fibers or extrafusal fibers, and second type of fibers, these are intrafusal fibers. Okay. So these are basically the muscle fibers that are visible from outside, and intrafusal fibers, these consist of the receptors that are involved in stretch reflex as well as inverse stretch reflex. Now these intrafusal fibers, these are again of two types. Okay. First are the nuclear bag fibers, and second are the nuclear chain fibers. Again, these nuclear bag fibers, these are of two types, dynamic nuclear bag fibers and static nuclear bag fibers. Okay. So these intrafusal fibers, they play a very important role in the initiation and regulation of stretch reflex. How? We shall understand. Now here intrafusal fibers, they basically mean our muscle spindles. These are the intrafusal fibers. These muscle fibers, extrafugal and the intrafusal, these are placed parallel to each other. So in this diagram, as you can see, the outermost fibers, these are the extrafugal fibers, whereas this part, it represents intrafugal fibers, and here we are talking about muscle spindles. So these fibers, these are parallel to the extrafugal fibers. Okay. So this is about the receptor. So whenever we discuss about any type of reflex, first of all, receptors, they have to be stimulated. Then the impulses have to be carried by some afferent fibers towards the integration center. Efferent fibers, they'll have to take the information back to the target organs, and where we can see the effect of the stimulus. So in this case, receptors, these are the muscle spindle. Afferent fibers, these are 1A fibers or type 2 fibers. Efferent fibers, the fibers that are coming out from the spinal cord, these are either alpha or gamma motor neurons, and the effector organ, here we are talking about extrafugal fibers, and the response is contraction of the muscle. So that completes the definition of stretch reflex. When an innervated muscle is stretched, there is muscle contraction. Now how these muscle fibers, these are stretched out? We shall understand that part now. So that is how we represent the whole muscle, and from that whole muscle, a small part, it represents intrafugal fibers. So here there is muscle spindle. Now as we had discussed in the previous slide that there are two types of these muscle spindles, nuclear bag fibers and nuclear chain fibers. So this is the representation of nuclear bag fibers. So these nuclear bag fibers, they have a centrally dilated part and they contain several nuclei. Here are the nuclei. The central part, it is non-contractile. Okay. Central part is non-contractile, whereas the polar ends, these are contractile. Okay. Now these are nuclear bag fibers, and here I am showing you the nuclear chain fibers. They contain very less nuclei. Now about the nerve supply, if we talk about, first of all, the afferent fibers. I told you these are 1A fibers and type 2 fibers. 1A fibers, they take the impulses from the central part of the nuclear bag fibers, especially the dynamic nuclear bag fibers and the nuclear chain fibers. So that is about type 1A fibers. Another name of these fibers are primary fibers or annulospiral ending. Annulospiral endings. Now, second is about type 1B fibers. They take afferent from the nuclear chain fibers and the static nuclear bag fibers. That was about the afferent 1B. Here are the type 2 fibers. That is about the afferent nerve supply. Now, if we talk about the efferent nerve fibers, I had already told you alpha and gamma. Alpha is towards the extrafugal fibers, whereas the gamma nerve supply, the dynamic gamma, it is towards the nuclear bag fibers, whereas the static gamma takes the efferent from the nuclear chain fibers and the static nuclear bag fibers. Okay, so let's revise it quickly. Also, extrafugal fibers, that is muscle spindle, these are of two types, nuclear bag fibers and nuclear chain fibers. Okay, nuclear bag again of two types, static and dynamic nuclear bag fibers. Here is the representation of nuclear bag fibers and here we have shown the nuclear chain fibers. Okay, regarding the nerve supply, afferent fibers 1A, that take the afferents from nuclear gamma nuclear bag fibers and the nuclear chain fibers. Whereas type 2 fibers, they take the afferent from the nuclear chain fibers. Regarding the efferent supply, dynamic gamma towards dynamic nuclear bag fibers and static from the nuclear chain fibers and the static nuclear bag fibers. Now let us discuss what is the entire mechanism behind this stretch reflex. Again, I'll show you the muscle. Okay, this is the extrafugal part of the muscle. In between this, we are showing the muscle spindle. It lies in parallel with the extrafugal fibers. From this muscle spindle, the fibers 1A and type 2 fibers, they will reach to the spinal cord. That is how spinal cord has to be shown. This is the integration center, spinal cord. Now from this, these are the afferent fibers. And the efferent fibers, they supply the extrafugal fibers and these are the alpha motor neurons. So that completes the reflex arc. Afferent fibers from the muscle spindle via 1A and type 2 fibers, they will reach to the integration center, and efferent fibers, that is the alpha motor neurons, they supply the extrafugal fibers, and ultimate response is contraction of muscle contraction. Now we had said one term, that is stretching of a muscle, it leads to contraction of muscle. So from where does this stretching of muscle comes? Stretching of muscle comes with the role of these muscle spindles. The muscle spindles, we had discussed previously that the gamma motor neurons, they bring to the efferent nerve supply of these muscle spindles. So the gamma neurons, what do? Gamma neurons, these are at the polar end of these. These are the polar ends. Here is the gamma nerve supply. Here also is the gamma nerve supply. Whereas the central part, it is the non-contractile part. This one, it doesn't undergo contraction. Only the polar end of the muscle spindle, it undergoes muscle contraction or the contraction of intrafugal fibers. So once there is contraction at the polar end, it leads to stretching of the central part. Once the muscle spindle undergoes stretching, there is passive stretch of the muscle as well. Stretch of muscle spindle, okay. It leads to passive stretch of extrafugal fibers also. And once the extrafugal fibers, they undergo stretching, there is travel of impulses via 1A and type 2 fibers. They reach towards the integration center, okay. And from the integration center, the efferent nerve fibers via alpha motor neurons, they reach towards the end of extrafugal fibers and there is contraction of entire muscle. So that is the main mechanism behind this stretch reflex. So we can show it with the help of a flow chart as well. Stretch of muscle, afferent fibers via type A and type 2 fibers. They reach to the integration center, spinal cord, and there is release of excitatory neurotransmitter glutamate. From spinal cord, impulses via the alpha motor neurons, they supply extrafugal fibers and there is muscle contraction. This is the entire mechanism behind the stretch reflex. And how does this stretch of muscle happens? Here comes the role of muscle spindle. Here you can show muscle spindle, increase in the gamma discharge. It causes contraction of the polar ends of muscle spindle and there is stretching of the muscle spindle. Once the spindle is stretched, it causes passive stretching of muscle and there is contraction of extrafugal fiber. That is the main response. So that was about stretch reflex. Now what is the importance of stretch reflex? Why are we studying this reflex? Mainly it helps in the maintenance of muscle tone, because the fibers, they undergo contraction, so the muscle tone is maintained, and if the muscle tone is maintained, there is maintenance of posture, and third is it has a role during the day-to-day voluntary activities also. So these are the three important roles of stretch reflex in